Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional lands and airways we're all meeting. Pay my respects to elders past and present. A quick reminder, this webinar will be recorded and streamed on the U.S. Consulate General's Sydney Live Facebook page. And on behalf of the Australian National University, led by the ANU Center for Asian Australian Leadership, and our co-host for today, the U.S. Consul General Sydney, I would like to welcome you to this special in conversation between two inspirational voices and storytellers, George Takei and Adam Liaw. I'd also like to acknowledge members of our advisory board for our Asian Australian Leadership group. That is Ki Wong, Marina Go, and Sung Lee, who are all with us here today. We at the ANU are thrilled to be co-hosting this conversation with our dear friends from the U.S. Consulate General Sydney. And we are certainly hoping this will be the first of many events and collaborations for months and years to come. Thank you all for the opportunity in helping pull this virtual event together and what has been, I know, a particularly difficult and challenging time in Sydney. And those of us in Canberra and indeed across the country give our best to Sydney and the lockdown you're going through. ANU is Australia's national university, and we strive to reflect the extraordinary and increasing diversity of the Australia we serve. This is through our research, through our education, through our leadership, and we're trying to make a positive progress in equality across any set of parameters you can think about. Australia is at its best when it reflects its people. We at the ANU have identified the need to breaking what is sometimes referred to as the bamboo ceiling and increasing Asian Australian representation in senior leadership positions as a top national priority. And that is one of the reasons why we did establish our Center for Asian Australian Leadership in January last year. Today's conversation is not the first, nor will it be the last, as we aim to achieve greater Asian Australian representation and cultural diversity leadership across our public institutions and private sector corporations. So without further ado, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce our guest speakers who will be leading this afternoon's conversation and discussion. George Takei is a global icon and really needs no introduction, but is a pioneering actor, award-winning author, Grammy-nominated recording artist, social justice activist, and influencer. For me, he is one of the first people I remember in watching TV, right up there with Big Bird from Sesame Street, Shaggy from Scooby-Doo, and Sulu from Star Trek. As someone who became an astronomer, I can look and say that I identified with Sulu at a very early age and was always proud to put him ahead of Captain Kirk and even Spock as my favorite character. So George, it is a true honor to have you here today and a privilege for me to meet you even if virtually. I would also like to give a special shout out to Adam Liaw. It's great to have you back, Adam, helping us here at ANU. Many of you will know that Adam was the winner of the MasterChef Australia in 2010, and I remember watching him go through that season because I like to cook as well. That's my little thing I do on the side, my therapy for life. He's one of Australia's most captivating storytellers and writers. Some of you may not know, but Adam has been on our journey in Asia Australian leadership from day one, serving as our first guest speaker at the inaugural Leadership Summit in September 2019. He's also a judge of the 2020 40 Under 40 Most Influential Asian Australian Awards. So Adam, it's great to have you back within our community. I look very much forward to hearing and learning from the two of you. And Adam is moderating today, and our guest speakers will be touching on a range of topics and themes close to George's heart, such as racism, activism, representation, and leadership, and of course the importance of the AAPI Heritage Month in the United States, and the impact of the Stop Asian Hate movement in the United States and abroad. And hopefully we'll throw a little bit of Star Trek in there too, George, if only to satisfy. Not last, and last but not least, I'd like to introduce our representative from the U.S. Consulate General Sydney, Adele Gillen, the head of public affairs, to provide a short welcome on behalf of the consulate. And I know she's just arrived from the United States. Welcome to lockdown. Welcome to Australia, Adele.
Thank you very much, Vice Chancellor. I appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who's joining us today, especially our two speakers. We can't wait to hear from you. And so just very briefly, I'll say on behalf of the consulate why we are co-hosting this important discussion today. Vice President Kamala Harris, the first Asian American in our history to hold the office, said, "A harm against any one of us is a harm against all of us. The President and I will not be silent. We will always speak out against violence, hate crimes, and discrimination, wherever and whenever it occurs." Tragically, we've seen a rise of racism and xenophobia toward people of Asian and Pacific Island descent and heritage worldwide during the COVID-19 pandemic. Hate crimes against this community have risen by 150% across the US in the last year. Yet despite these increasing acts of intolerance and violence, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders continue to make invaluable contributions to the United States, as they have for many generations. I hope our discussion today will do a little bit to break the silence Vice President Harris mentioned, and that today Australian and American voices will come together to share our common values of diversity and tolerance and learn from each other about confronting racism and discrimination wherever we find it. I would like to thank our partner, ANU Center for Asian Australian Leadership. It's a pleasure to be working together on this. And another very special thank you to our guest speakers, Adam Liaw and George Takei. We are honored to have you here. And now over to you, Adam.
Thank you so much, Adele, and thank you as well, Brian. It's not often you get to interview one of your idols after being introduced by a Nobel laureate. So this is a fabulous day for me. Not too much housekeeping before we get into things. That you have different views on your Zoom. You can choose to have active speaker. I believe it's only George and I who have our videos on, but we don't have too much time, so I'm going to jump straight back into it. You can ask questions. You can see the chat box there. If you type your questions into the chat box, and you can upvote questions that you might want to ask George, and I believe the moderators will call on you, ask you to unmute and turn on your video to ask that question directly as we get to the end of the chat. I want to open, George, by reading something my friend sent to me when he found out I was interviewing you. His name is Mark Fennell. He hosts a program in Australia called The Feed, and he interviewed you when you were last here in 2015. He said, "Without a doubt, one of the loveliest people on the planet to interview. You will have the best time with George. I love him." And he goes on to say that he believes that you and Alan Alda are two people that we have to protect at all costs. So he is a huge fan of yours, as I am too. And welcome to Australia, albeit virtually. You are almost Australian, though. You have some uniquely Australian experiences. You've eaten witchetty grubs and you've eaten kangaroo penis when you were living in the Australian bush filming the UK version of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. You've heard from my intro that I am a cook. Have you had any nice food in Australia, or has it all been the weird stuff?
I love eating in Australia, and there's one discovery I made that is probably the most delicious, succulent, unforgettable eating experience in the world. And the name you give it is like the kind of things that I ate on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. I ate live termites, live locusts, as well as kangaroo penis. We can't say that here, can we?
We can.
And what was the other? Grubs.
Yes.
The first two I loved, but the supreme Australian food that everyone in the world should taste at least once in their life is what you call bugs. I mean, what a horrible name to give such a lovely, delicious, extraordinary eating experience. I think you put the word Moreton Bay in front of bugs, but when you first hear bugs, you think, good Lord, is it going to be another one of those I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here type of menu? It, to me, is a combination of oysters, lobsters, shrimp, and crab. It's an extraordinary flavor, an unforgettable flavor. And I don't think you can find anything like it all of the world. And I'm also told that it doesn't travel well. There was a Japanese businessman who tried to, well, he thought the Japanese dining public would enjoy that, and he tried to import it. He flew it over, didn't work. It was something happens in the flying process. And so he thought, well, maybe if it goes on a slow boat to Japan, and that didn't work either. And so one really, if you want to have that experience, you have to travel to Australia, and even better than Sydney, go to Moreton Bay, and that's where I first tasted it. It was delicious, and I recommend it to anybody in the world, particularly Australians, when you have such easy access to it. Try it once at least, and you will be addicted. Despite that,
Fabulous. I believe they're actually trying to change the name of those to I think fan lobsters or platter lobsters to remove that stigma associated with the word bug. But I'm glad to know that you enjoyed them. Let's talk about your early life for the time being, George. You were born in the US. Your mother was born in the US. Your father was born in Japan. What was life like for you as a very young child?
well, the thing that I remember most was a horrifying morning, but I think I need to give you a little background behind it. On December 7th, 1941, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. It was a horrific bombing, and the terror from that bombing swept across the Pacific to the West Coast, and then it rolled across the country all the way to the East Coast. The people of the United States were terrified. The next morning, President Roosevelt declared war on Japan. And for a small minority group here in the United States, the terror was intensified. For Japanese Americans, suddenly, overnight, we were looked at with suspicion and fear and outright hatred simply because we looked exactly like the people that bombed Pearl Harbor. And as we're seeing today now, because of the pandemic and the coronavirus, Asians or Japanese people well, all Asians look alike, and they weren't discriminatory on which Asian, but Japanese were the ones that were targeted. Japanese American citizens of Japanese ancestry were spat on the street, attacked, and terrified. And our cars, our homes were graffitied. And the terror of the masses sucked in the so-called leaders of the country, mayors, city councilors, state senators, governors, and the President of the United States. The government came down with a curfew. All Japanese Americans had to be home by 8 p.m. at night and stay home until 6 a.m. We were imprisoned in our homes at night. And then the next day, if you went to the bank to make a deposit or a small withdrawal, we discovered that our bank accounts were frozen. Our life savings was gone. We were left penniless. All our money was taken from us. And my father's business, therefore, failed. We had a home which required a mortgage, but the mortgage payment couldn't be made because our money was all taken away. But the banks didn't bother us because they knew that we would be going away soon. And the President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who my father said was a great president in the 30s when we were in the depths of a depression. He was the leader that pulled the nation up. because we not only had an economic depression, but a spiritual depression. People were unemployed, homeless, hungry, and they were broken people. And President Roosevelt said, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. And he was able to galvanize the nation and bring the economy up. But with Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt was made insecure because that was a surprise attack. We weren't ready, and that's why it was so devastating. But now he not only had Pearl Harbor to worry about, but the entire West Coast that was open and vulnerable to a surprise attack. And so he was sucked into the hysteria of the masses. And on February 19th, 1942, he signed Executive Order 9066, which ordered all Japanese Americans on the West Coast of the United States, approximately 120,000 of us, to be rounded up with no charges, no trial. The central pillar of our justice system, due process, disappeared. Under due process, if you're arrested, you have a right to know what the charge is, what we're being arrested for. And then you have the right to challenge those charges in a court of law where the accuser has to produce evidence of that act that we're charged with. And if they're found to be valid and true, then we're punished. In our case, there was no charge. Therefore, no trial, just forced evacuation. And I remember that morning. I have a younger brother, Henry, a year younger than me, and a baby sister who was not even a year old, and she was in a crib. And one morning in the May of 1942, my father came rushing into our Henry and my bedroom, dressed us hurriedly, and told us to wait in the living room while our parents did some last-minute packing in their bedroom. And our baby sister was there in a crib with our parents. And so my brother and I were just gazing out to the neighborhood from our front window. And suddenly we saw two soldiers marching up our driveway. They carried rifles with shiny bayonets on them. And I remember the shininess of that bayonet. They stomped up the porch and with their fists began banging on the door. I thought the whole house was trembling. My father came out of the bedroom, answered the door, and literally at gunpoint in America, innocent American citizens of Japanese ancestry were forced out of our home. My father gave my brother and me little packages to carry. He hefted two heavy suitcases, and we followed him out and stood on the driveway waiting for our mother to come out. And when she finally came out, she had our baby sister in one arm, a heavy duffel bag in the other, and tears were streaming down her cheeks. That terror of that morning is embedded in my memory. I will never forget that the terror of that morning.
I'd just like to, at this point, to thank the US Consulate General, acknowledging that parts of this discussion may not be entirely flattering to US political history, and genuinely applaud them for not just allowing a discussion like this to happen, but for actively facilitating it and inviting George to this discussion. You know, I don't think that is a level of political courage that many nations or international missions would be able to embrace. But George, how does an experience like that, you know, something that at such a very early age, essentially almost your country turning against you, how does that change the way that you viewed yourself as an American and your relationship with America?
Well, it's a very complex story. There's much more to it, but I'll simplify it. We were taken from our home, and essentially, we were first taken to the horse stables of Santa Anita racetrack. And and by that time we were taken there by a large bus, and each family was assigned a horse stall to sleep in, which for my parents was one of the most degrading, humiliating, and painful experience, to take their children, 3 children, into a horse stall, still pungent with the stench of horse manure. We were there for about 4 months, 5 months, while the camps were being built. And we were then packed into a train with armed guards at both ends and taken to the swamps of Arkansas, a barbed wire prison camp, high sentry towers, machine guns pointed at us. There were 10 of these camps in all of the most desolate places in the country. We were in the swamps of Arkansas. There were 2 camps on the blistering hot desert of Arizona. There were camps in Wyoming, Idaho, Colorado, Utah, and 2 in California. This history is one that is a shameful history, as you say. Not, the word isn't flattering, unflattering, it's shameful. But if you look at the whole chapter of that period, and that takes decades, it is a statement, a powerful statement about the integrity of American democracy. Because what had happened, I mean, our Constitution has great ideals, and our justice system, equal justice under the law, that disappeared. Due process, that disappeared. And there was a consciousness of that. But young Japanese American lawyers knew that that was wrong, and it was contrary to the American system of law. And lawyers knew that too. My hero is this one lawyer, Wayne Collins, an ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union lawyer, who fought the injustice against the Japanese Americans from the very beginning and all the way to the end. And he is my hero. And there's a lot of layers of complexity. But because of that, people like that, Wayne Collins, we were able to come back home to Los Angeles, impoverished. Everything had been taken from us. When the gates of the prison camp was opened, we had nothing. We were impoverished. The government gave us a one-way ticket to anywhere in the United States we wanted to go to, and $25 to start life anew. It's a commentary on the resilience and the determination to get back on our feet of the Japanese American people. And my heroes are really my parents. They worked day and night, 7 days a week, literally over 20 hours a day to get back on their feet with their goal of educating their 3 children. With the passage of time, young Japanese American attorneys kept pressing and pressing for redress and reparations. And so in 1980, they created a commission to gather information on the incarceration of Japanese Americans. I testified at that in 1981, and I'm proud of that testimony. All those testimonies that were given, and there were, as I said, 120,000 people that were in prison. By that time, only by 1981, only 60,000 of us testified. But that was all studied and examined by the government lawyers. And in 1988, President Ronald Reagan, on behalf of the United States of America, formally apologized for a grave mistake and signed the Civil Liberties Act, which pledged a $20,000 token redress for that. But at that time, I was part of a group that was raising funds to build the Japanese American National Museum. And in 1991, when the check came to me, the entire check went to fund the Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles. But the fact that a great nation had the confidence and the integrity to recognize a profound mistake and own up to it is a commentary on the power of our democracy, and that people eventually can, a people's government can make up for it and apologize. It is a powerful commentary. First of all, the mistake was made, but we call our government a people's democracy. And people are human beings that are fallible. They make mistakes. And so that's the weakness of a people's democracy. The fact that we are human beings that have that fallibility. And that's why it's so important for responsible citizens to be active participants in a people's democracy.
So it's a truly incredible story. Let me jump forward a little bit to Star Trek, because I know a lot of the people tuning in do want to hear about that. Huge fans of yours, as I am as well. When you were cast as Hikaru Sulu in the mid-1960s, was that for you as an actor at that point just another role, or did you have an inkling that would have the significance that it has had, not just in terms of your life and your career as an actor, but also in terms of representation for Asians in media?
It was for me clearly and unquestionably a landmark event. I went to audition for it. I was interviewed by Gene Roddenberry, the creator of the series, and he described to me the premise of the series. Oh, beyond that, he was a man who was a very deep social thinker. He thought that television at that time in the 60s was being wasted, because the 1960s in the United States was a turbulent time. We had the civil rights movement, African Americans demonstrating for equality, a just campaign. And they were being attacked by law enforcement people, sheriffs, Southern sheriffs, with attack dogs and fire hoses and being beaten. That alone was fodder for storytelling. At the same time, we had the Vietnam War going, a war that was splitting the United States in half. Half the nation supported the war, the other half was actively campaigning for peace in Vietnam. And so at a time when there's all this turbulence, television wasn't reflecting that at all. It was game shows, comedies, cops and robbers, Western cowboys and Indians, nothing reflecting the real drama and the social turbulence of that time. And he wanted to use television to have some rooting in those realities. And he said, what we're doing is placing American society 3 centuries in the future, the 23rd century. And the story is going to take place on a huge, vast starship. And the starship is going to be the metaphor for Starship Earth, this huge planet. And he said the diversity of this planet coming together and working together in concert is its strength. People from all over, from North America, Europe, Africa, Asia, all the major racial and cultural groups of this planet coming together. And so that was at the core of Star Trek. And that was visibly clear with the casting of the starship. The captain was a North American. The engineer was a European, a Scotsman. The communications officer was an African American, an African, and a woman. And my character was to represent all of this vast part of this planet, Asia. But his challenge was to find a name for this Asian character, because every Asian surname is nationally specific. Tanaka is Japanese, Wang is Chinese, Kim is Korean, and mid 20th century Asia had a turbulent history of warfare, colonization, rebellion based on national warfare. And he didn't want to suggest that. He wanted to find a name that suggested all of Asia working together, and that representative working together with all of this planet's diversity. And he had a map of Asia pasted on his wall. He was looking at it, trying to get some inspiration. And he saw off the coast of the Philippines a sea called the Sulu Sea. And he thought, the waters of a sea touch all shores. And that's how the name Sulu came to be for the Asian character. So he had this philosophy. And when I heard that, I desperately wanted to be a part of that. And I knew that personally for me as an actor, it would be a great breakthrough for me, because it was not stereotype. He was a part of the leadership team, and there was a stereotype about Asian drivers being terrible drivers. And he was the helmsman. He was a driver, a galactic driver, and #1 in the galaxy. And at the same time, I saw how this character would be shattering the various stereotypes that Asians were saddled with in American media, and particularly television, but also movies and theater. And so I desperately wanted the role. And it's a commentary also on Gene Roddenberry's good taste and judgment that he selected me.
That is a truly incredible story, George. But we can, I guess, laugh about the prescience of it, but it is truly kind of genius. When you're thinking about mid-1960s America, you have Nichelle Nichols, who's cast as, not just the first Black actress in a lead role, but in a leadership role on the starship as well. One of the most iconic images of Sulu is you looking, frankly, quite hot, bare-chested, with a fencing foil fighting. You could, if you were to cast that today, I can imagine there's people sitting in a writer's room going, why would you make the Asian character fence? Shouldn't he be doing karate or kung fu or something like that? All of these, it almost seems like active rebellion against stereotype before that was even a concept in media.
That was the concept, to shatter stereotypes, but also get people thinking, because all of our scripts referred to a contemporary social or political issue. We had one where there were 2 alien life forms. They all happened to be anthropomorphic. They had a head and 2 arms, and they looked like us because they couldn't afford to have really fantastical makeup or appendages on the bodies. But this one breed was black on the right side and white on the left side. And another breed was black on the left side and white on the right side, and they couldn't get along. You can see where, the commentary on American society in the mid 20th century was. So we had commentaries on social issues like that. We had commentaries on the Vietnam War. We had this two great civilizations all intact, and the battle is fought on a board game, and the loser has to send so many numbers of their young people to be destroyed in the destruct machine. That's what Vietnam was. Our young people and the young people of communist nations were being sent there. So he was using the 23rd century starship as a metaphor for Starship Earth and the problems that we're having, but also how they were dealing with the problems and boldly going where no one had gone before.
I want to jump forward a little bit now because we are very limited in time. In fact, I'm actually already supposed to be throwing to questions from the audience, but I am going to keep you for a few more minutes before we do that. You've been an activist since your teens, as you say, but at the same time, you also felt that you had to remain closeted for the purposes of your own career. I think it's a thing that a lot of Asian Australians and Asian Americans struggle with because we are, I guess, in some ways seen as being a model minority that doesn't cause too many problems and don't make too many waves. How do you strike a balance between speaking out and also self-preservation, doing the things that that will allow you to provide for your family, will allow you to have a career?
I did both. I passionately loved acting, and I was able to lobby my parents into supporting that decision. And I was fairly lucky. My very first feature film was with Richard Burton, this great Shakespearean actor from England. And all my scenes were with Richard Burton, and we became good friends. Well, I was a theater student at UCLA. I was seen in a production at UCLA and plunked out of that and plunked into this feature film. 2 months, 2 weeks on location in Alaska, and another month and a half back at Warner Brothers Studios. So I was very lucky with my career. That was because I was a trained actor. At that time, people couldn't afford to train as an actor because the rewards weren't there. And it was a highly risky area to go into. But I was so passionate about it that I boldly went where my parents reluctantly allowed me to go. And so I was successful with that boldness. But by that time, I had, well, even before that, from the time I was about 9 or 10 years old, I was realizing that I was different in ways other than my face. We were imprisoned because of our face when I was a child. We were punished because we looked Japanese and American at the same time. And after we were released, and I was about 9 or 10, I was realizing that I thought Bobby was really cute. And Richard was really athletic. Uh, but he must have come from a poor home because all his clothes looked like his t-shirt looked like it should be for a kindergartner. I mean, really tight and tiny, and so his tummy showed, and the jeans were tight as well. And when he hunkered down to play marbles, the the t-shirt would run up and the trousers would pull down, and I saw the rear cleavage below the small of his.
We call that plumber's crack in Australia.
What crack?
Plumber's crack, when a plumber bends down under a sink.
Plumber's crack. Well, and that used to excite me when I realized that other boys didn't feel that way. I was different. And I recalled that we were punished for looking different. I still look different, but they accept us now, but I feel different. And I didn't want to be different and be punished again. And sure enough, there were other boys that they called sissies who walked around holding their books to their chest, and there was a slight kind of wiggle to their walk. And after school, they got beat up by the bullies. So they, people who are different will get punished. And so I decided I didn't want to be punished again for feeling different. And I started acting like the other boys. And when they started to date, I dated girls. And if my buddy wanted to double date, I double dated. But to tell the truth, I was more interested in my buddy than in my date. So I was hiding who I really was by acting like the other guys, while I was also being very active in student government, and also volunteering for political candidates. The first presidential campaign I volunteered for was Adlai Stevenson for president. Didn't succeed there. I was a volunteer for George Brown for U.S. Senate from California. He didn't make it. And so I was discovering that the people I think are wonderful people are not getting support. Then I supported my city councilman, who happened to be an African American, the first African American city councilman in Los Angeles. And he decided to run for mayor. I supported him, and he won. And so I became very active in electoral politics at a very young age. And at the same time, I was hiding who I really was inside.
I feel like I'm monopolizing the questions here, and I do have to throw it open to some people in the audience. So Lucy Lynn, if you could unmute and turn your camera on, I'd like you to ask the first question to George, if you may.
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm not sure how I can turn my camera on. Maybe the organizers need to do that.
Maybe not. Let's proceed with the question without the camera on.
Okay, here we go. Hopefully that works now.
Hi, Lucy.
Hi, how are you?
Hello, Lucy. How are you?
Good. I'm going to change my background to make it look a little bit sunnier.
I want to be there with you. It looks lovely.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to ask a question. I'm a very big fan of you both, and your story is so inspiring, George. Thank you so much. My question is, I'm an Asian woman, and not only do I have to break the glass ceiling in the workplace, but the bamboo ceiling as well, which is even harder. So I'd love to ask both you, Adam and George, if you have any recommendations, tips, or advice for lifting more Asian voices, and also showing increased representation in the workplace and also in media as well.
Well, I think you can do both if you are strong enough. I mean, for me, with an Asian face, to want to go into the acting arena, I'm a native Angelino, born and raised in Los Angeles, except for the World War II period when we were behind barbed wire. And it was the craziest thing for me to pursue acting for movies as a career. My father used to tell me, look at television, look at the movies, look at Broadway. The only time you see Asians are when they're servants or when they're the villains. Is that what you want to do? And I said, no, Daddy, I'm going to change it. And it sounded crazy, but I was determined, and I was confident that I had what it took. and I needed a little nudge, a little bit of luck to pursue that. And so you who are trying to break that glass ceiling for women and for Asian women, you have to be so determined because you're going to be the first. You have to be that strong and that driven to be a success in the arena that you're going into. It's not easy. It's in fact, it's very hard, but you have to be determined, and you're making an important contribution because you're adding to the diversity of your community. If there's no women in leadership positions or in areas where women have not been involved before, and Asian women, then that requires that much more determination and strength and the talent and the background. I went to UCLA, studied theater. Got my master's as well. And so I was armed. I was able to hold my own on the set and have an intelligent back and forth with the director on analyzing a scene. Most Asian actors at that time were not that prepared because there weren't those opportunities. The intelligent ones were intelligent enough and rational enough not to go into and knock their head against a concrete wall. The ones that were there were like waiters, and they had their main gig, and their gig provided them the opportunity to take off for a week or so. And so you if you're going to be venturesome, you have to be determined to go at it full speed, complete commitment to what you've chosen to pursue.
Thank you, George. To that, I would also just add that it's important to lead by example and to inspire with leadership in that respect. But it's also very important to tangibly offer opportunities to people who you see potential in. You know, if an old boys network can keep getting jobs for the same old boys, then there are networks that you can join and be active in that you can help to provide those opportunities to people who may not otherwise have access to them. I'd like to ask the second question to come from Erin Chu. Erin, could you please unmute and ask your question to George? I'm not sure if we have too much time, so if you could keep it quite short, that would be great.
Okay, cool. Thanks, George, for your history and everything you spoke about. So my question was, in Australia, the issue of racism is perceived as a political issue and not a human rights or social justice issue. With the COVID-19 racism against Asian Australians and Asian diaspora, there is a hesitation by the community to speak because of the perception that this is too political. How can we work to change this perception?
It happens with the person that's determined to do it. Someone, I mean, I keep going back to that Star Trek opening phase, to boldly go where no one has gone before. You know, that's true in life. You've got to be venturesome. You've got to be prepared to seek those opportunities. So it's a combination of the opportunities coming and you being prepared to fill or seize that opportunity. It's a situation, so many people complain, but they're not prepared. It's a two-way street. The opportunity has to come, but you also have to be prepared to seize it. And it's not going to be easy, even after you seize it. You have to deliver on that. And that's where you become the trailblazer. You succeed, and others are allowed in because of your success. And the employer discovers that there's a benefit to having people with a different background, a different history, and different preparation. And, you know, on Star Trek, we say infinite diversity in infinite combination. The whole becomes stronger because everyone in that diversity of a diverse team is contributing to an area that the existing team did not have the ability to fill. So it's being prepared and being strong enough and venturesome enough, assertive enough to move forward and fill that opportunity.
Thank you so much, George. I'd like to ask the next question to come from Alan Wu, if I may. Alan, are you ready with the question there?
Hi, sorry, I was just fiddling with Zoom. Let me just pull it up, sorry. My question was just regarding whether you have any reflections on how and why the sort of movements for social justice and equality for gay and lesbian folks has made such sort of tremendous and rapid progress over the past few years, while those for racial justice seem to feel more chronically hamstrung.
I think ours is going to be a long journey because like with the African Americans, you know, there is this, what they call systemic racism. From the very beginning of the coming of Asians to America, and I'm sure true in Australia as well, we were different and we were looked at with not complete trust and sometimes with revulsion. Most of the early immigrants were laborers or farmers, and particularly those that went into the cities had to live in very shabby circumstances, and therefore they assumed that disease were brought by the people that came from Asia. And that's still, I mean, here we are with COVID all over the world, and Asians are the first suspect. In fact, we have our, what I call has-been president, the past president, who continuously and relentlessly used the phrase Chinese virus or Wuhan virus or the Kung flu, characterizing it as something that came from China and brought over by the Chinese. And Chinese and Japanese and Koreans and all the rest of us look alike. And so we're seen as the bearers of disease. And so that initial prejudice goes way back. In my hometown of Los Angeles, in 1881, there was a woman that claimed that a Chinese man had molested her. And very quickly, a vigilante team formed. They poured into Chinatown and dragged out 17 young Chinese men to the central square. Los Angeles was a pueblo, and every pueblo with a Spanish heritage had a pueblo at the center, and the city grew around it. The 17 young men were dragged out from Chinatown, brought to the plaza. There's a huge tree with a thick, heavy trunk and branches going out. Very quickly, 17 Chinese bodies hung from that tree. In the South, they called it a lynching. 17 Chinese young men were hung, lynched in the central square of Los Angeles, my hometown. That was happening in the American South regularly to the South America, the Southern African Americans. My mother was born in the rural part of Sacramento, and there, Asian children and Mexican children, not Latino children, but Mexican children, were the only minorities in that area. They went to a school that was inferior to the regular school, the white school. There was segregation, there was lynchings for Asians in California, my home state, my hometown. We have a history. And so again, when we have a president, a leader of the country, who continues to refer to a disease as the Chinese virus, horrible things start happening to Asian and Asian Americans. And usually, I mean, these people are cowards. And so they pick on the elderly and the frail. And we know the story of this very elderly Asian man walking down the sidewalk, and a young man comes running down the sidewalk and slams him down to the sidewalk. He hits his head on the concrete, and the concussion kills him. That happened last year, 2020, in Oakland, California. Over 3,800 such assaults have been recorded in just 1 year, from February 2020 to February 2021. It's happening still today. It's a very real situation. And so that's why our participation in a participatory democracy is vitally important, so that we're not seen with any stereotypes. Mention was made of the model minority. No, we aren't. We are various different kinds of people. There are some that fit that minority, that description, but we are diverse, and they don't recognize our humanity, our diversity. They want to simply categorize us with a sweeping generalization. As when Pearl Harbor was bombed, they had this sweeping generalization. The Japanese are potential spies, saboteurs, and fifth columnists. When 9/11 happened, they had this sweeping generalization that Muslims are potential terrorists. No definitive rooting in reality, just that generalization. And so we, by participating in a participatory democracy, put to rest that attempt at generalizing and stereotyping us.
George, I think we're reaching time, but I want to thank you for a sobering but also very inspiring discussion. I'd like to also thank the US Consulate General here in Sydney for arranging this, the Centre for Asian and Australian Leadership at ANU for facilitating it as well. But of course, most thanks need to go to a star of stage and screen, activist, writer, and of course, daddy of the internet. Thank you so much, George Takei.
May you all live long and prosper. Yes, I know this is Spock's, but I believe in joining in and using anything good and positive and affirmative from any alien being or a human species. Live long and prosper.
George, thank you so much.